Hey, this is Commander Atlas Rand. Greetings, Commanders. And joining me for this episode is Commander Mechan. Welcome.
Hey everyone. Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I figured, if we're going to talk about Thargoids and how somebody who's never really fought Thargoids and thinks that, oh, it's probably way too difficult, it'll be years before I can do that, what's going to be the best way for them to approach it? And who better to talk about it than someone who is probably the most qualified to talk about Thargoids, at least as far as I know. Um, and I know you're two models to probably say a whole lot about yourself, but I will definitely say that even though I've been playing the game for about 5 years, the majority of what I've learned about how to fight Thargoids has come from your group and the videos that are created, and lately watching your live streams as well.
Well, thank you, first of all, for kind words. There's actually a lot of people qualified. In fact, I began my anti-casino career probably late in the history of Elite. And I myself stood on the shoulder of giants. I've learned a lot from folks who came before me. I'm only glad and happy to try and pass on some of that knowledge to folks who have looked at or are looking into anti-casino combat more recently.
Yeah, and I think we've got two main groups. One are people that are just brand new to the game, and I've managed to trick at least 3 people in the last 3 months to join the game. So that kind of got me motivated to start creating these videos. Is not only are there sort of generic new players out there, but there's actually 3 people who are new that I know personally. And I want to make sure that they know what they're doing, even if I'm not online and they can't ask me a question. But the other group that is also a pretty good size right now are people coming back to Elite from having maybe played Elite 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, not really been playing for the last 2 to 3 years. Maybe they got turned off by Thargoids when Thargoids first appeared. But whatever it is, they're kind of coming in now, and they're seeing that there's been a lot of changes with the game this year. And maybe now they feel like, wow, the Thargoids are almost gone. I better try to do something there before they're completely gone. And what I mean by gone is, of course, 9 out of the 10 Titans have been killed, and there's only 1 left.
Yeah, for one, you have 2 more Titans than we do, because I think there's 8 out there.
Oh,
but
sorry.
Yes, there is only 1 left. But if you know of 2 that are hiding somewhere,
whoops, I wasn't supposed to talk about those. Pretend I didn't say anything. Yes, only 8. Yeah, we'll ignore the other 2. But I think there is definitely an influx of new people. Looking at the increase in the players on Steam, and just anecdotally, the more participation in various Discords, I think there are a lot more people coming back right now.
No, for sure. I mean, if you look at the numbers of participants in, for instance, the community goal around the defense of Shinrata Desra, which is probably the most meaningful proxy of people who are in any shape or form interested in anti-casino combat, the number comes to about 9,000, which it's hard to guesstimate what the actual active community around Elite currently is, but I probably would guesstimate it's somewhere in the 20,000 range. So that 9,000 is about half, would be my guess. If anybody has some better numbers out there, they should put them out. But those are the numbers I have, or that are kind of rattling in my head.
And I wish Frontier published the numbers officially. That would be great, but they don't. So we have to kind of estimate based on other factors. Well, let's kind of split those 2 groups up and start off by talking about somebody who is just maybe 2 or 3 months into the game, but they do want to try some Thargoid hunting. And I know that I'll include links to some unengineered ships that are on the X site, but can you kind of talk people through of what ship they could bring if they're a beginner, and what type of Thargoid they should be fighting? Probably not a Hydra.
No, for sure. I mean, maybe it's helpful to just set a little bit of context, because setting expectations right is half of having a good experience, I think. Elite in general is a very easy game, as most of the activities anybody can do with very little practice or training once you kind of figure out the controls and manage to get out of a mail slot. The game itself is pretty easy. There's like also very little punishment for mistakes. Like even rebuys with the influx of money are broadly inconsequential. There's very few things that kind of set you back in the game. In contrast, anti-xeno combat and PvP are the two activities in the game that are actually pretty tricky, as in the skill ceiling and to a degree the skill floor to engage in those activities is meaningful. So if you try and go at it unprepared or just sort of try it without any kind of like preparation, you are unlikely to be successful in those two activities. So knowing what to expect and knowing how to go about it is important. Now, you mentioned unengineered ships. It's entirely possible to do anti-xeno combat in unengineered ships. In fact, we have some challenge ranks of our own that encourage people to try it out, and just so they can learn what it means and what it entails to fight interceptors without any kind of engineering whatsoever. It is very hard, however, and it is not something I would recommend to beginners. At the very least, I would suggest beginners engineer their thrusters and their power distributors, and that makes the fight incredibly easier. And that comes to another factor that is very different from the rest of the game. In the rest of the game, bigger is generally better. As in, bigger ships are more capable and more likely to be able to let you do whatever you're trying to do, whether it is hauling or whether it is combat at hazardous research sites, or whether it's, well, to a degree, even exploration with the Anaconda like was one of the kind of go-tos if you want. Not so much when it comes to anti-xeno combat. And the anti-xeno combat, Thargoid interceptors hit way too hard for you to be able to tank the damage, which is what people usually do up to that point in more regular sort of progression. In anti-xeno combat, what you want to do is you want to avoid damage. And to avoid damage, you essentially need two things. You need speed, and you need to be cold. If you're cold, an interceptor cannot lock onto you. If it cannot lock onto you, it can't hit you. If it can't hit you, you tend to survive longer. So having ships that are fast and cold is key. And since most ships that are actually engaged in combat cannot reliably stay cold for a long period of time, most ships equip heat sinks and just spam heat sinks for the time that they are engaged in combat with interceptors so that they can stay cold and avoid damage, as I mentioned. This is a very different way of fighting from, say, taking an Anaconda, slapping multi-cannons on and blasting away at a Hazres, and is also somewhat more involved. So in order to get the gist of it, first and foremost, having a ship that is at least minimal engineered with thrusters and power distributor goes an enormous way to make your life easier. In particular, what's important is it's critically important that your ship is faster than the interceptor itself. In most interceptors, top speed is 450 meters per second. If your ship is slower than that, and most unengineered ships are slower than that, then you really won't be able to dictate range to the interceptor, which means the interceptor is constantly be on top of you, and that's going to make the fight really hard. If, however, you do put some at least minimal engineering, like grade 3 or so thrusters on a crate or on a chieftain, that should allow you to get past 450, and in that case, then you get to dictate range to the interceptor, and that makes the fight incredibly easier.
Let's go through some terminology that you mentioned here. So interceptors, what are interceptors?
Interceptors are one of the breeds of Thargoids, and if you exclude Thargoid Titans, they're the largest breed. When you think about the classes of Thargoids in space, there's really three classes. There's Scouts, that are the smallest. They're the easiest. They're also the only ones that are not entirely invulnerable to non-anti-xeno weapons. They're kind of a nuisance. And in a swarm, they kind of be dangerous because like a lot of them can end up hitting pretty hard. But if there's only a handful of them, they're pretty easy to take down. So they're not a big focus of combat in the game. Then there's the intermediate-sized Thargoid. They're called Hunters. And there's two variations of Hunters in the game. There's Glaives and there's Scythes. And those are tend to be rarer in the game, and they tend to be more advanced things to fight, and they're also pretty nasty in terms of like what they can do. Like for instance, glaives can melt your guardian weapons with an anti-guardian field, so it's generally not something that you'll be facing when you start out. Interceptors are their bigger brothers, and they're the mainstay, if you want, of a Thargoid invasion fleet. There's 4+1 variants of interceptors, 4 are combat variants, and then there's a special seed ship called the Orthros, which doesn't actually have weaponry and is a bit of a special case that we can talk about separately. When it comes to the 4 variants of interceptors, in increasing order of difficulty, there's a Cyclops, there's a Basilisk, there's a Medusa, and finally, at the top of the food chain, there's the dreaded Hydra. Now, the Cyclops might be the weakest of all interceptors, but that weakness belies the fact that even though it's the weakest interceptor, it is much harder than any other NPC in the game. So yes, it's the weakest, but it's also pretty damn hard to begin with.
Yeah, that's it's a steep learning curve, not just to fight them, but to actually know how to not just sit in one place like you would with normal NPCs and then shoot. Like you have to move, so you have to both shoot and move, which is not really what a lot of people do. If you look at NPC combat in the game, they get into their Corvette, they park it, and then they just sort of spin around its own axis while they're shooting.
That's right. Whereas instead, in interceptor combat, because you cannot just tank damage, you gotta keep moving. And the technique, the mainstay technique that was developed to fight interceptors is what is generally referred to as cold orbiting, which, simplifying a little bit, means moving very fast while staying cold and shooting at the thing. Cold orbiting can be done in a variety of ways. You can do cold orbiting with flight assist on if you wish to do so. However, cold orbiting is generally considered to be a lot easier if you do it in flight assist off, which is another element of learning to fight interceptors and Thargoids in general. Flight assist off is not the most common mode, so it's another thing that people will need to get used to if they're interested in fighting interceptors, or at least it'll be helpful to them if they get used to it before they fight interceptors. And flight assist off really starts with getting your controls right. Setting up your controls so that they work as intended in flight assist off is the first step. You can't really fly in flight assist off if you don't have, for example, relative mouse enabled if you're a mouse and keyboard player. And if you haven't at least done some kind of fine-tuning of your controls, if you're really any kind of control player. And there's some wonderful tutorials that have nothing to do with Thargoids and have everything to do with just flying from the likes of Max and Wolf out there. If anyone's interested, those are a place to go to kind of get your feet wet in flight assist off flying.
And flight assist off does a few things. It doesn't just mean that if you start a turn, you will continue to turn. Certainly that's one of the things that happens. But also your speed limits change, which is also important, I think, for cold orbiting. You're able to move faster while you're exerting a directional thrust. And then you will continue to move in that direction when you stop the thrust as well, although it will gradually slow down. So it's not quite completely a space simulation, but it's a lot closer to what spaceships would be doing and what they currently are doing, real spaceships in space as well.
That's mostly right, yes. Flight assist off fundamentally decouples your pitch, yaw, and roll axis from your movement axis. And what that allows you to do, it allows you to turn much faster, and it allows you to essentially thrust or accelerate in a direction other than the one you're facing, moving, or otherwise heading, not heading, but moving towards. It doesn't really change your speed limit as a whole, with the exception of backwards for reasons that are still unbeknownst to me. Flight assist on limits your velocity backwards.
I
But
tend to fly backwards a lot.
yeah, so in that sense, yes, it does limit your backwards velocity, but in every other direction it doesn't. And again, with the exception of braking, like Flight Assist all cheats as far as how fast it can brake your ship. That's an interesting aspect, which probably not a lot of people know about. But besides that, Flight Assist off doesn't fundamentally change the inherent characteristics of your ship. What it does change is how the controls react to your inputs, first and foremost.
So as we kind of started with the two groups, the people coming back versus brand new players, if someone is brand new, which ship do you recommend that they get? And let's say that maybe they've got a couple of engineers open, so they are able to get their the two items you recommended. The was it the power and the distributor, or no, thrusters and distributor?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We have, first of all, low engineering version of our builds that use only the starter engineers. So people like the Dweller and Felicity Farseer, which allows you to get a few things to grade 3, some things just to grade 1, but enough to sort of like make a ship already feel pretty significantly different. So those are available, and those are generally recommended for beginners, be like above and beyond a completely and purely unengineered ship. And by the way, now that they fundamentally changed the drop rates for materials, it has become a lot easier and a lot less painful to engineer a ship, which is a good thing. In terms of a ship to recommend, and here it's again helpful to maybe take a step back a moment. The world of anti-casino combat has changed pretty profoundly in the last year and a half. It used to be that interceptor combat was really just a one-on-one fight, where you used to head to a Pleiades, find an interceptors, and then duke it out one-on-one. That was most of what interceptor combat was a year and a half or 2 years ago. With the advent of a war, you now have a much broader range of scenarios. Like you have, yes, you still have solo combat, you still do that if you want. You have anti-casino combat zones and invasions. You have Titan bombing runs. You have rescue scenarios at Titans. You have various combat scenarios in and around occupied territories. So there's a much broader and a much wider range of activities when it comes to anti-casino combat than there was 2 years ago. And there's actually a couple of ships that are better suited at specific things. The most recommended and most flexible generalist ship that can do pretty much all of these things is what we call the common core of a Crate Mark II. And if you sort of like are familiar with my YouTube channel, there's a video there called Crate Mark II Anti-Casino Combat Guide. And that explains what the common core is for the Crate Mark II, which essentially is a set of standardized modules which then you can use to swap weapons around and do pretty much whatever you want in the game with that ship. So if you build one ship, that should be the ship you build. If you are specifically focused on one-on-one interceptor combat, which is typically done in the Pleiades, so not in the war zone, as the war zone behaves differently, the Chieftain is usually considered a better ship to start, as the Chieftain is easier to fly compared to the Crate. It handles better, and it has almost the same firepower. So the net trade-off is a ship that is easier to use and hits almost as hard while handling a lot better. So that's why the Chieftain has been the so-called meta of anti-casino combat for such a long time, because it sort of summarized the best possible characteristics of a combat ship, even though it might not necessarily be the most excellent at everything. It's exceptionally easy to use and a great place to start.
Okay, well that's good advice. So the two ships that have the common cores are going to be the Chieftain and the Crate.
The Crate has a common core. The Chieftain, it doesn't have a common core. The Chieftain has the Chieftain has a so-called meta build, which is a recommended build for solo interceptor combat. But the thing about the Chieftain, and the point about the Chieftain, is that it is exactly that. It lacks a common core. So you can't really retrofit a Chieftain to, say, go Titan bombing. Or rather, you can, but it's not going to work very well. So you probably shouldn't.
Okay, got it. So
That's also
people,
why the pre-built AX Chieftain is really not good.
yeah. So people that want to try different things with Thargoids probably would be better off getting a crate right from the get-go.
I would agree.
Yeah.
In this time and in this age where most Thargoid content is related to the war, it's hard not to recommend the crate as a starter ship. You'd have to have someone who is really sort of set on improving their technical skills in solo combat. In that case, you'd recommend the Chieftain. But for everybody else and the public at large, the crate is a ship to go.
All right. So how about for people that are coming back? So they've got engineers unlocked. If they don't have materials, they're easy enough to get now, so they can engineer a ship. But they haven't done any really combat with Thargoids in the past. What would you recommend for them?
Exactly the same thing. The common core exists in two versions. It exists in a beginner version, which is just for people who have the beginner engineers unlocked. And then there's a common core proper, which is instead a G5 build for people who have all engineers or the majority engineers unlocked.
Okay, great. And then both those builds are on your website, and we'll have links in the description to the website as well. But go ahead and shout out what the website is.
Sure. I mean, these ships should be available on the wiki of the Anti-Xeno Initiative, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
They are definitely
I think you're right. I don't
on
have it in front of me. That's why I
Yeah.
didn't say the name.
I mean, the thing is, it's sometimes I get a little lost because I've been mostly working on the Xenostrike Force website, and there's a bunch of things there. I think we put the Common Core. I'm actually going to look at it now. I think we put the Common Core of a Crate Mark II up there. Ship builds, crate. Yeah, we have it. It's on xenostrikeforce.com. Under ship builds, there's a Crate Mark II Common Core, and it's described there. This one should also be on the Anti-Xeno Initiative website, I believe, but I haven't checked that in a little while, so don't hold me to it.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Now, you also mentioned war versus solo. So let's talk about what are the different locations that you can fight Thargoids in.
I mean, sure. There's a set number of places, typically nebulas, where interceptors naturally spawn and have spawned for time immemorial. That's a Pleiades Nebula, that's a Coalsack Nebula, and then there's the Witchhead Nebula. In all those three nebulas, if you head out there and just hang out, you're going to see that systems are littered with non-human signal sources, and in those non-human signal sources, you will find interceptors and scouts. There's also a host of points of interest like distress calls and the like, megaships, damaged megaships that also host activities for interceptor combat. In fact, there's still a few remnant megaships in the bubble that have interceptor spawning around that, and taking the war scenarios away, that is the only place in the bubble where you can come across interceptors for a matter. So that's the sort of solo combat arena as you generally think about them. Then there's a battlefront and the sort of war proper. And there used to be 8 Titans, now there's only 1 left. Around that Titan there's a number of control systems, and on a weekly basis a number of invasion and alerts spawn. Those invasions and alerts get cleared very fast because they're currently one of the most credit rewarding activities in the game. You can clear over 1 billion credits in an hour with a good group at one of those invasions picking up missions. So it's not surprising that they go very fast.
Yeah.
To give you a sense, like they spawn on Thursday morning and they're usually done before the end of Friday.
Yeah,
that's how fast they go.
We're recording this on Thursday, and I was late for literally that exact reason. We were just finishing up one of those shared mission deals and had the last couple of Thargoids to kill. So yeah, they do tend to go fast, and now that there's only 1 Titan left and a limited number of places that people can go to a planet's surface to do the war Thargoid fighting, I'm really wondering what's going to happen, because This is a fun activity, and if this just goes away, that'll be too bad.
I mean, that leaves the realm of what is known and understood and can be explained, and enters the realm of speculation. So if you want me to speculate, I can speculate, but when it comes to speculation, your speculation and anyone's speculation is just as good as mine.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I think I've told you before my theory, which I have no basis whatsoever for it being true, is that I've always suspected that the last Titan is going to fly out before it's destroyed and go towards Colonia, and then Colonia will become a place for people that want to go do Thargoid hunting. But I have literally zero basis for that. It's just something I think would be cool if it happened.
I mean, it's an interesting theory, based on my understanding of the psychology of our developers, which is limited and flawed because obviously cannot be perfect by definition. I don't know how likely that is going to be. I mean, there's a range of things. Like for one, there's clearly an 8th decal incoming, so that chart has been printed out in terms of like giving people that final reward.
Mm-hmm.
And then Colonia has always been sort of handled as a sort of safe haven for people who wanted to be away from the bubble and the sort of humdrum of what's going on in mainstream elite. So the idea of dropping Thargoids onto them doesn't sound like the most popular initiative.
I think it'd be hilarious.
Well, it'd be hilarious for some and annoying for a lot of others.
Yeah,
So, like,
but
in the
then
balance of things, it'd probably be more annoying than hilarious. So that's why I
well,
combine those things. I'm not sure it's all that likely to happen, but who knows? You might be
yeah,
right.
it probably isn't very likely. But also, having the Thargoids appear in the bubble was also annoying for a lot of people when they first showed up.
Oh, it was. It still is. The people still complain about getting interdicted in the war zones
Yeah.
when they're not paying attention to the route planner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've had a few trips when they first showed up that I wasn't thinking about Thargoids when I was doing exploration, which I did quite a bit of, that just cut right through that area. And then I got killed twice in a DBX on 2 different occasions when I just forgot that I was flying through Thargoid space.
Some lessons I learned the hard way.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. But it is fun fighting them. So okay, so we have the nebulas, we have the war zones, which have both on surface and also stations that have been destroyed or wrecked, I should say, that have combat opportunities. Then we also have spires. Tell us about that.
Spire sites are visually pretty stunning, and used to be the most profitable activity in the game when Thargoid orifices were worth 40 million a pop. That was reduced recently, or nerfed, some would say, so that orifices are now worth 15 million a pop, and consequently the massive focus of the community to fighting at Spire site has somewhat subsued, as now fighting invasions is more profitable than fighting at Spire sites. So a lot of the focus has shifted to invasions. Nevertheless, there's still quite a bit of activity at Spire sites, primarily because fighting at Spires is one of the most effective ways to progress the war effort, as Spire progress is what drives what is so-called spread progress, which means every progress you make at a Spire gets replicated across the 10 outermost systems of the active Titan that our community is currently fighting. And then in this case, it's just one Titan left, so that Titan is Cohio. So fighting at Spires does significantly and materially contribute to the war effort, so there's a benefit to doing that. At Spires, in normal circumstances, you will only encounter Thargoid orifices, scouts, many scouts, and the occasional Cyclops that is summoned as escort to orifices when they are attacked. Orifices are an interesting breed of interceptor because they don't really fight back or shoot you. They only have sort of defensive measures. They have a caustic trail they leave behind them. In addition to that, they fire their shutdown pulse once they're attacked, and they have the ability to trigger anti-guardian fields that melt unprotected Guardian weapons. So there's a few ways to fight at Spires. Like the easiest one is to simply not bring Guardian weapons so that they don't melt to Orphis firing that pulse. Using regular human weapons doesn't do all that damage, but in a group, it does enough to take down Orphises. So that's one way to hunt them out there. Another way to hunt them is to use some of the old Guardian weapons that have been engineered at Ramta with anti-Guardian Zone resistance. That's definitely possible. However, the anti-Guardian Zone resistance is somewhat expensive in terms of materials, and from some materials that are actually difficult to gather. So it's more of an endgame strategy, if you will, to do it that way. And then finally, probably the most sophisticated and advanced version of fighting at Spires is to bring a really well-trained group, use modified Guardian weapons which do not have anti-Guardian Zone resistance, but basically bring such an overwhelming amount of firepower that Orphises get deleted before they even have a chance to fire your anti-Guardian field, and as a result cannot damage your weapons in time. That's probably the most advanced way to hunt at Spires. It's also the most fast and the most profitable, but it does require you to be in a really good group to be able to take advantage of it, so it's the least common. In addition to Orphis and Scouts, there's a special couple of breeds of Thargoids on the ground. There's Revenants, that generally will leave you alone if you're flying around, unless you get too close. And then there's Banshees, which instead are quite annoying because Banshees essentially fire surface-to-air shutdown missiles, which briefly shut your ship down. Now, the shutdown from a Banshee missile is much shorter than the shutdown from an Interceptors. However, because there's 8 Banshees on the ground at the Spire site, it's not uncommon to be chain shut down by multiple missiles from the Banshees that essentially results in your ship being constantly shut down. The good thing about Banshees is they do not respawn. So once they are destroyed, typically from missiles fired from the air, although you can also go on foot and shoot them on foot, once they're destroyed, they will not respawn, and consequently what people typically do is they'll join a Spire site, they start by cleaning out the Banshees. Once the Banshees are being cleared out, everybody starts to focus on the Orphises, and they keep going until they have time, patience, and will to do it. The final thing about Spires is there's a mechanism at Spire sites where it's possible to land a ship on one of the pedals and proceed on foot to perform specific missions that are handed out by stations in close proximity to occupied systems. That's actually a 2-stage mission, where the first one sends you to recover a specific set of materials from under the mega barnacle-like structures. And after you've done that, you're given a semi, or what is it? It's like a contaminated Spire sample of some kind, which you can use to bring into a special location underneath the pedals where you can land your ship on the Spire and sabotage the Spire site. Sabotaging a Spire site turns a Spire from green to orange, and it will summon combat interceptors. So sabotaging a Spire is the only way to see basilisks and medusas at Spire sites. And you can do this repeatedly. So you can sabotage, there's 8 bins at every Spire site. I think it's actually 8. Is it 8? Yeah, I believe it's 8. It's 4 on the main one, and then 2 and 2 on the minor one. So it's 8 bins total. So you can spawn quite a few interceptors if you chain sabotage a Spire site. One of the challenge ranks we have in the Anti-Xeno initiative is to have a group sabotage the entire Spire site in a group of 4 people or fewer. It's actually quite a lot of fun. So that's Spires for you.
Yeah, and they do look gorgeous. I mean, especially if they're on the dark side of the planet where, there's a lot of things glowing. Yeah, it looks very cool.
Oh, yeah. My favorite time to fight the Spires is sunrise or sunset. Because of all the things that came with Odyssey, which people got to complain about, one thing I will say that they really nailed is atmospheric scatter effects. Like the lighting in sunrise or sunset just looks gorgeous.
Yeah. Now there's one other place that you can get Thargoids coming in the bubble, and that is Dead Titans. So, what are Dead Titans, and what can you do there?
Sure. Titans that have been crippled go into a stage called Meltdown, which lasts 24 hours. After those 24 hours are passed, I mean, there's a timer that counts things down. Titans go up in a big, huge ball of plasma, which leaves back a hot mess, like with some crazy caustic levels, which is inaccessible for a few days. Once that huge ball of hot plasma cools off, that's when so-called Titan graveyards become initially accessible. In Titan graveyards go through 3 different decreasing stages where they start at relatively high caustic and then have an intermediate phase where there's less caustic and the caustic cloud has mostly dissipated. And finally, there's a final stage, which is where I think all Titans at this point, except the last one that we just blew up, are in that final resting stage. The final resting stage has no caustic whatsoever. And at that point, you have NPCs that spawn. So NPCs will only spawn when the caustic has dissipated. In addition to a caustic, there's going to be patrolling interceptors, there's going to be patrolling scouts, there's going to be patrolling hunters. That typically scythes and pairs of 2 are patrolling at Thargoid graveyards. And Thargoid graveyards are great places to just scavenge and pick up on a bunch of materials that are healthy and handy for a number of engineering and synthesis purposes. Like, for example, caustic crystals, which are one of the components that are required for anti-guardian zone resistance engineering, are most easily farmed at Thargoid graveyards. The only place you can get them otherwise is Thargoid maelstroms, and they're a pain to get in maelstroms. So they're much more handily farmed in Thargoid graveyards.
Yeah, and I've brought a couple of fairly new players to a Titan graveyard because we can just jump there on the carrier right to that system, and then fly out to the graveyard. And while it's unpredictable what kind of Thargoids are going to spawn there, there's usually very few, and quite often it presents a good opportunity for someone to try combat with a Thargoid without having to go too far or have to deal with interdictions of Thargoids if they're going to a battle zone. So I just found it a nice area to kind of introduce people to some Thargoid combat, sort of like what we had when Shinrata Desra was being attacked. Then people could that are in the middle of the bubble could come in and fight Thargoids without having to travel out of their normal areas.
And then 3 Hydras show up at the same time, and then they figure what fighting 3 Hydras entails. But yes, I agree with you.
Well, and they're moving at 3 times the speed of their
spinning
normal.
away because someone just went to dock. Yeah, no, it's definitely more buggy. No, I agree with you. Like Spire sites are great for. Sorry, not Spire sites. Graveyard sites are great for that purpose. I will say that Medusas do spawn out there, and those are nasty. So if you see Medusas, leave them alone. But if you see Hunters, Scouts, and the occasional Cyclops, then it's a great playground for sure.
And with the Hunters, just bringing the anti-Thargoid multi-cannons. You want to just give a brief rundown on what are the most popular weapons and what are the Guardian versus non-Guardian?
Sure. Probably the most reliable entry-level weapon for anti-Xeno combat is the large gimbaled enhanced anti-Xeno multi-cannon, which is a mouthful, but it is what it is. It's a weapon that's available for purchase using only credits, so no materials or engineering required at any one of the rescue megaships, which are marked on the galaxy map with blue and green cross. And that's where you would want to go to sort of purchase your weapons if you're completely new and just entirely getting started. in anti-xeno
and
combat.
also on some carriers. My
Some
carrier
carriers
sells
stock, my
those.
carrier stocks them too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So not a lot of people know that though. So
yeah,
you're gonna find few carriers that have stocked up on the
yeah.
new anti-xeno kit. So yes, they can stock it now, but not a lot of carriers do. So I wouldn't say that's a very reliable way to get them. Um, so that's the sort of like starter weapon. Um, the problem with, I mean, the good thing about those weapons is they're gimbaled, so they're very easy to use. The problem with that weapon is that they're underwhelming in terms of DPS. So once you start fighting things that are tougher than a Cyclops, you're gonna want something that punches above that kind of weight. Um, so where do you go? The next natural step is Guardian Gauss cannons, which are the staple of anti-xeno combat and by far the most adopted and longest standing weapon of choice that works against pretty much anything and everything, and is only moderately hard to use as they have a delay in shooting, but otherwise just hit scan weapons. In order to get Guardian Gauss cannons, you need to make a pilgrimage out to the Guardian sites and play the minigame with the pillars, which is actually quite fun to do the first few times, to get the blueprints for Guardian weapons and the materials that are necessary together with the blueprints that then you turn in at a Guardian deck broker for the unlock of Guardian Gauss cannons. Once you've unlocked them, you are able to purchase them for credits anywhere anywhere a Guardian tech broker is available. There's two variants of those, small and medium, and people tend to unlock both when they go and head out to unlock those. Beyond Guardian Gauss cannons, probably the most popular advanced weapons are the so-called modified Guardian shard cannons. And those are available exclusively at a planetary port called Prospect Deep in the Mbuni system, which furthermore requires a permit, which you can obtain by working for Azimuth Biotech in the surrounding systems. Once you get the permit, make your way there, you'll find a special tech broker which allows you to purchase on a one-by-one basis. Unlike Guardian Gauss, this is not an unlock. Like each weapon requires dedicated materials, so it's very expensive in terms of materials. But if you're willing to do the grind, you'll be rewarded with what is probably the best overall multi-purpose weapon in the game, which is modified Guardian shard cannons. The downside of modified weapons is that they cannot be engineered for anti-Guardian zone resistance. So while they do punch above their weight and above the weight of regular weapons, they are not usable in Titan space, nor are unreliable in situations where glaives and other interceptors that use anti-Guardian fields like Orphuses spawn. So there's no single best weapon in the game. Like, you need to use the weapon that is appropriate for the scenario you're at, taking in consideration how much damage they do and also how much ammo they have. The reason why Guardian Gauss is not popular in Titan space, for example, is because even though it's extremely effective, it has very limited ammo. So since Titan space takes a while to get to, you don't want to be out there for just 2 minutes before you run dry. That's why most people who head to Titan space will use the old shards instead.
What do you think of plasmas?
So plasma's an interesting one.
Other than the fact that you can't see anything after you shoot it.
Yeah, no, there's some downside in terms of like visibility with a cloud they leave behind, but that's not, I want to say, the main thing. So plasmas come in their original version, and then plasma come in the modified plasma chargers version. Similar logic as shards, as I was talking about earlier. The old plasmas are not all that good. They're not all that good primarily because their shot speed is comparatively slow. So it's hard to actually hit things with them. If you can actually hit things with them, they do a very good amount of damage. But because their shot speed is so slow, it's hard to hit things consistently with them, which is why they're not popular. Modified Guardian Plasma Chargers instead are pretty good weapon. Like they solve the shot speed by multiplying the shot speed. I don't remember by what factor, but like a factor of 8, something like that. It's like the shot speed of modified plasmas is incredibly fast.
I think it's 6,000 meters
Yeah,
per second.
six times, not 6x. Um, so the shot speed becomes much faster, which makes them incredibly easy to aim, and far more reliable of a weapon. They still have one of the main issues of regular plasmas, and the fact is they're incredibly power distributor hungry. You cannot reliably use more than 3 on a Crate Mark II, which has a class 7 power distributor, which is the second largest in the game. And even on the Anaconda, you cannot practically use more than 4. You can use 6 on specialized builds, but you're going to be dry after 2 shots and a half. So they're kind of more specialized weapons, if you will. Like I personally only use them to hunt with Anacondas at Spire sites in organized wings. I do not use them for anything else in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting weapon. It does force you to play a little bit differently, I think. But now, for the last couple of things we've talked about, we've gotten into a little more advanced, going to Guardian sites and then not even just unlocking, but actually going to Guardian sites enough times to get enough materials to get those weapons one weapon at a time individually. So, yeah, I think we've covered a lot of the basics. So let me ask you this. Is there anything that I haven't asked you or that we haven't discussed that somebody that's fairly new wanting to get into Thargoids would be need to know?
I mean, probably the only thing that we haven't talked about, which is of general interest, is attacking Titans proper. So the act of Titan bombing, which is the culmination of every step of the campaign against Thargoid Titans. What people need to know in that regard is that Titans aren't always vulnerable. They only become vulnerable once the number of controlled systems around them falls to 3 or fewer, which the current going rate, I mean, it's checking things, I think there's 85 systems still active. And the fact that we're clearing anywhere between, and we also sustain a clearing rate of about 20 a week. The last week we cleared 33. That number is going to go down as the effort required to clear systems goes up the closer you get to a Titan. So it will be probably somewhere in the 4-week range before the final Titan becomes vulnerable. So my guesstimate would be the first half of December. When the Titan does become vulnerable, that's when the bombing campaign begins. And that's when people take out somewhat specialized builds of Titan bombers that are used to bomb the vents on the top side of the Titan to expose the thermal core on the bottom side of the Titan, and then typically use either missiles or shards that have been treated with Ramta's anti-Guardian Zone resistance to do damage to the thermal core. That is what's required to get the rewards associated with the bombing campaign. There's some arcs rewarded to people who do damage to the core in tiers, and then there's special paint kits and Thargoid-inspired ship kits, in addition to a special decal that is awarded to people who participated in the campaign. In order to earn them, you have to do at least 2 million worth of bomb damage to the thermal core in the week before the Titan goes in meltdown. So that's the Titan bombing. It is more complicated, and there's more to know about Titan bombing than I think we can explain in a simple video, as you need specialized equipment like a Thargoid pulse neutralizer to cross the pulse barrier, and you need to bring caustic sink launchers so that you don't kind of like burn away in caustic before you even get there. You'll need nanite torpedoes to hit the vents, but there are other videos and other places to learn more if you're interested in that.
Yeah, and
it is something to experience in the game, though. I will say, if you haven't participated, if you haven't seen a Titan for yourself in the first person, take the opportunity to make a trip to Corhilio. It is one of the most remarkable things in the game.
Yeah, and I was going to say they're definitely. You guys have links on the websites also to Titan bomber builds, so people can take a look at what are the optimal setups to do that. And I think just generically, we can say everybody is very much encouraged to fly in wings and to do Thargoid hunting with other people. It's a lot more fun. It's potentially a lot more profitable. And you can get together with people that have done a lot of times, and they will help you really get better at fighting Thargoids and enjoying doing it a lot more. So with that, I appreciate your time. I want to thank you for all this great info. I think you've probably, by providing it, are going to encourage more people to actually go and try their hand at Thargoids before the last Titan is no longer here. And I appreciate you spending the time.
Thank you for having me. Happy hunting, Commanders, and glory to mankind.
Glory to mankind.